Hi, I'm Dr. Tam Cummings and I'm a gerontologist who specializes in dementia. Family caregivers of people with dementia go through something called the long goodbye. When we look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work with David Kessler, Kubler-Ross and Kessler are the ones that talk to us about stages of grief. The stages of grief were meant for any kind of loss: the loss of a job, the loss of a friendship, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a loved one. And in family caregivers of people with dementia, you do what we call the long goodbye, because you go through these stages over and over and over again. I go through these stages every time I get stuck at a red light. The first thing that I go through is denial. No, I can't possibly be stuck at a red light. Then I go through anger. I'm very angry at the person in front of me who didn't get out of my way so that I could get through the red light. Then I begin to bargain with God. Oh, God, please let this light turn green. I'll be a better driver. I won't drive fast anymore. I'll do it right. Then I begin to get depressed, because I don't know if you've noticed it, but some of these red lights are really getting long. And then finally, when I think I'm so depressed I can't get better anymore, I begin to accept that eventually the light will change. And when it does, I zoom away again until I get to the red light, which turns red and stops me again. And I go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance all over again. Some of you may even tell yourself that I've grieved as much as I can grieve. But the reality is your loved one is still here. And when they die, grief will start all over again. Thanatology is the study of death and death culture. And what we know in our country is we don't like death. We don't like to talk about death. And even our obituaries don't talk about death. And obituaries are technically a story that you have died and here's some of your life history. We're so uncomfortable with death that we keep death hidden. We don't talk about it in obituaries, and many of your loved ones, you may have only been able to visit them when the ICU unit said you can come in now for your 5 minutes. 60 years ago, this person would have been at home being cared for by you. As our country went from being 97% of us lived in a rural area to now only 3% of us live in a rural area, people got removed from death, the death that happened on farms and ranches of animals. Because of our advances in medicine, we don't see the death of children that we used to. We don't see the death of our elderly the way we used to. So are you afraid of death? When you think about death, is it something that you're afraid to talk about? And is there a pastor, a minister, a rabbi, a spiritual person, or a friend that you can go talk to about that? Because it's something that we all have to go through. And as we advance in age, death actually becomes a friend of ours once we've reached a certain age in our life, not something that's scary and way out there. So your loved one may not feel the same fear for death that you may feel. There is a dignity of life, and the dignity of life that all of us are looking for is respect. But what you find as a family caregiver is that many times there doesn't seem to be much respect for the dignity of your loved one once they have dementia. One of the biggest complaints from families is that when they see a professional with their loved one, the professional doesn't make eye contact or even acknowledge your loved one. And that's a dignity issue. And you can feel free to question any professional who does that, because that's their discomfort, and that's not the correct way to be. In spirituality, studies at Baylor University in the social work department show that people with dementia do not blame God for having dementia. They do continue to look to God for reassurance and solace as they age. And we know that spirituality and spiritual events and spiritual icons, whether it's rosary beads, whether it's a statue of Mary and Jesus, whether it is biblical scripture, the Talmud, the Quran, that our religious and spiritual beliefs are very important to us, and we must continue those even with our person with dementia. It's just that we have to modify them. Your loved one doesn't need a church service of hell and damnation that goes on for 2 hours. Your loved one needs singing, prayers. God still loves you. We're all going to go to heaven in whatever form your heaven is, and then we're done. You have to shorten the amount of time, but it's important that we continue to do these things for our loved ones. Those spiritual rituals are important to us, and they help soothe us as we grieve this process, and they also help your loved one as they move forward through this process. In gerontology, we use a formula called the cycle of life. The cycle of life theory says that I am born in the fall and I will die in the fall. My mother was born in the summer and she will die in the summer. Demographics prove that your cycle of life is 30 days before your birthday and 60 days after your birthday. That 90-day window is when most of us will die. If you're a religious or a spiritual person, you'll find that your texts even talk about a time to be born and a time to die, that there is season and purpose in our life. And the season and purpose is 30 days before your birthday and 60 days after the birthday. After the age of 25, 80% of us will die in the cycle of our life. Even people with cancer, even people with dementia will die in the cycle of their life. The 20% who don't either died in an accident or had a medical intervention that stopped their death from occurring when it was supposed to occur. That's why when you look at obituaries, when you look at your own family history, you realize that people you knew and loved died in that window of time around their birthday. So one of the things that I'm looking at when I'm looking at your loved one is not only what stage of the disease have they advanced to, but also when is their birthday and when is this cycle of life period occurring. Because those are times when I'm going to be watching for a change in behaviors. When I'm thinking about a person and this sudden change in behavior that occurs, it is typically in the 2 months following a birthday that you will notice there's been a significant change in status in your loved one. Even though everything is in place for them to have care, the medicine is there, the food is there, the care is there, there's a roof over their head, the doctors and nurses come there to your person simply doesn't stabilize. So the doctor will add the diagnosis of adult failure to thrive. The process of actively dying is believed to be 9 months long, which is a balance to the process of being born, which is also 9 months. And in these final months, you will notice that there becomes a diagnosis of adult failure to thrive, and then some unusual things will begin to happen. Your loved one, even your loved one with dementia, will begin to have clear and vivid dreams and will describe to us those dreams even though their language is terribly depleted at this point. People that have not spoken will suddenly speak. What we have done for you in stage 7 is put into the tool what you can anticipate and expect as your person moves through this final part of life. We have monitored for you what to watch for in the final months. In the final weeks, there will be even more change. Their fall risk will actually go up as they continue to try and get out of bed. It's most commonly reported that they hear people calling their name. We notice that when we walk by their rooms, they're no longer making eye contact with us as we go by. Instead, they're now looking up. And frequently we see them reaching as though they're touching and talking to someone up there that we can't see. In the final weeks, frequently they will tell us someone's just been in their room, someone who's told them it's time to go, and they will tell that person, I'm not ready yet. And then we move into the final weeks. Use of food and nutrition and hydration begins to change. 20 years ago, we thought if we put G-pegs in people, if we put stomach tubes in them and forced food into them, that somehow this would stop this process, and it doesn't. When the person begins actively dying, the body is no longer using hydration and nutrition correctly. Monitoring systems show that the amount of calories that go into the body are almost the same amount of calories that are depleted from the body. And if a person is bedbound, they're using less than 500 calories a day, so there's not a great usage of calories anyway. This is part of the process of death, and even putting food into the stomach system doesn't help the person maintain. In the final days, their breathing will begin to change. Fever will begin to come and go, and fever is coming because the brain recognizes that now body tissue is dying and the body is becoming rampantly overwhelmed with infection. And the brain will attempt to raise the body's temperature, hence you get the fever, then the brain will fail and you get sweats. In the final hours, we have put down for you in your tool the order in which the human body will cease function. You will begin to notice a change in breathing, and apnea begins. Apnea is the absence of breathing, even though the person is still alive. So Cheyne-Stokes breathing will begin, in which the person takes a deep, heavy, ragged breath, and then they will exhale, but not take another breath. Many times you will think this means that they have died, but the pulse is still going, and you can clearly see that. And then 15 seconds to 90 seconds later, your person will take another breath. When Cheyne-Stokes breathing and apnea began, it is estimated that your loved one is either minutes or only a few hours from death. It is at this time you would want to be able to gather your family if possible, but be prepared that death is now coming. In the final breath, the person may make a pa exhalation at the end of their final exhale, and there may be spittle or foam in the corner of the mouth, and this is normal. The mouth is typically open in death, and the eyes are open in death. John Wayne doesn't ride in, get off his horse, wave his hand, and make the eyes and mouth shut. That's done at the funeral home. But if you're not aware that this is the normal presentation of death, you may think your loved one died with a grimace or screaming in pain, and that is simply not true. For the eyes and mouth to shut, the brain must be functioning and it must be able to tell them to shut. There will be a final movement of the body. The body will quickly become pale and cool and gray, and the body will appear to shrink immediately. If you're religious or spiritual, this is the belief that the soul is leaving the body. The body will become pale, cool, and gray because part of your coloring comes from red oxygenated blood. The eyes will become flat because there is no more blood pressure, and the body may release urine or stool. And in that moment, grief will begin again. Most of you will not remember the next 3 or 4 days as you move to the funeral and then to the day following the funeral. Most families are in a state of shock then as your brain begins to move memory from present tense of this person to past tense of this person. And even though you have been grieving for years, grief will begin again. There are some unusual things that happen when we grieve. The reality of grief is it takes at least 10 years for you to grieve for the loss of a person you loved, a parent or a spouse. If it's a child, whether it is an infant child or an adult child, that is a grief you carry till the end of your life. It's not 3 days, it's not 6 weeks. People trying to be kind may even say things to you like, well, you know, he had dementia. Well, that's true, but that was my only father. People may say, well, you know, she was really, really old. True, but that was my only mother. We become so confused in our need to console you that we may actually say the wrong thing. The proper thing to say to someone is that you're very sorry about their loss. It's important to be a friend here. Sending a card means a lot more than a text. We know that people cherish handwritten things, and we find them later on in their own death, the card that you sent years before. It's not unusual that after the funeral, you may go home and see your loved one walking through your house. That's reported all over the world except in our country where no one will talk about it because you're afraid somebody will think you're crazy. You may have dreams about your loved one. 6 months down the road, you may forget they're dead and you may find yourself shopping for them for a birthday or a holiday. You may find yourself picking up the phone to call them or actually driving to their house. Because your person had dementia, your first thought is, oh my God, I've got it too. And you don't have it. You're simply grieving. The way you count time will change. It will become the first Christmas, the first Hanukkah. It will become the second Thanksgiving, the third Father's Day. And eventually you'll reach a point where you can say the person's name without crying, and you'll know that your grief is moving forward.